Okay, welcome to the deep dive. You bring the source material, we jump in, pull out the most important nuggets, and help you get informed quickly, hopefully with a few unexpected insights along the way.
Yeah, we're your guides through the sometimes dense stuff, helping you see what really matters.
And today, we're doing a deep dive into a truly unique piece of Scripture. We're looking at the very last chapter of the book of Numbers, specifically Numbers chapter 36, verses 1 through 13.
It's almost, well, jarring, isn't it? You spend the whole book navigating wilderness wandering, plagues, rebellions, battles, just an incredible drama.
Right.
And then you arrive at the very end, and it's this quiet, seemingly technical discussion about land inheritance.
Exactly. It feels like an administrative closing remark, you know. But the source material we have argues that this quiet moment, precisely because it's at the end of all that chaos, actually highlights some incredibly powerful, perhaps overlooked truths. So our mission is to deep dive into this final passage and really understand its significance, especially when you hold it up against the broader, much, louder narrative of Numbers.
It's about finding profound meaning in the most unexpected, maybe even mundane details sometimes.
Okay, let's set the scene then. To understand chapter 36, we have to remember back to Numbers chapter 27. There was this fascinating, groundbreaking situation. A man named Zelophehad died, and he had no sons, only daughters.
Right, and these daughters, Mala, Tirzah, Hogla, Milcah, and Noah, they did something pretty bold for the time.
Yeah.
They approached Moses and the leaders and essentially said, look, our father died, but his name shouldn't just disappear because he had no sons. Give us our father's inheritance.
And really against the typical customs, God ruled in their favor. They were granted their father's land inheritance, which is a significant moment, establishing a precedent for women inheriting property.
Absolutely. A landmark decision. So now, fast forward to Numbers 36. The Israelites are right there on the cusp of entering the Promised Land, and the final arrangements for land distribution are being, nailed down.
Right, getting everything sorted.
And the tribal leaders of Joseph, specifically from the clan of Gilead, who's a descendant of Manasseh, Zelophehad's wider family, they come to Moses with a new concern.
Okay, so their relatives are seeing a potential problem down the road. What is it exactly?
Yeah, exactly. They've realized, wait a minute. Zelophehad's daughters have inherited land in our tribe's allocation. What happens if they marry men from a different tribe?
Ah, I see. Because marriage often meant, a transfer of rights and property back then.
Precisely. Their concern is that if these daughters marry outside their own tribe, their land inheritance would basically go with them. It would transfer over to the tribe of their husbands.
And why is that such a big issue for the tribal leaders? Just losing a bit of land?
Yeah. Well, it's more than that. See, land was the basis of tribal identity, economic security, and crucially, the fulfillment of God's promise of inheritance in the land. So if their land could just migrate to another tribe through marriage, it would permanently diminish their own tribe's inheritance. It would literally shrink their allocated territory generation after generation.
And the source points out they even note that this land wouldn't revert back to their tribe in the Jubilee year.
Right.
Because the transfer through marriage would be permanent. It's a perpetual loss.
Yeah, this wasn't just some minor inconvenience. It was seen as a potential threat to the integrity of the entire tribal land distribution system that God had, painstakingly laid out.
So, faced with this new, pretty complex problem involving inheritance law and tribal boundaries, Moses does what he usually does. He takes it to the ultimate authority, right? To the Lord.
Mm-hmm. And the command comes back from the Lord through Moses. In verses 5 through 9, God essentially says, okay, the tribe of Joseph, they're right. Their concern is valid.
So validating the potential loophole they spotted.
Yes. And the solution given is specific. The daughters of Zelophehad still have a choice in who they marry. They can marry whoever they think best. But there's a crucial condition.
Okay, what's the catch?
They must marry only within the clan of their father's tribe.
Ah, so essentially keep the inheritance within the extended family unit that belongs to the tribe.
Exactly. The core principle is stated really explicitly. Inheritance shall not be transferred from one tribe to another tribe. Every Israelite must hold on to the inheritance that belonged to their father's tribe. It was about preserving those divinely ordained tribal land boundaries for the future.
And the command reinforces that, okay, any daughter who has inherited land must marry someone within her own tribe's clan to prevent this kind of transfer. It maintains the system for everyone going forward.
Yeah, it brings stability to the whole structure of the Promised Land allocation. It stops things from getting messy down the line.
Now, here's where the contrast the source highlights becomes so powerful. Think about the rest of the book of Numbers. It's a story of murmuring, doubt, fear leading to disobedience, outright rebellion, consequences.
Yeah, constant
A
struggle.
constant struggle to trust and obey.
Time and time again, you see Israel faltering, complaining against Moses, complaining against God. It's kind of exhausting to read sometimes.
It really is. And then you get to the very end, chapter 36, and the text presents the daughter's response in verse 10. And it's just 5 simple words.
Yeah.
The daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord commanded Moses.
That's it. No debate, no hesitation recorded, no public outcry about, hey, this limits our marriage options. Just a quiet, straightforward act of obedience.
They really could have argued, couldn't they? But you previously ruled in our favor. This limits our freedom. But they didn't.
And the source notes, they're named again here, Mala, Tirzah, Hogla, Milcah, and Noah, which kind of underscores their individual agency, their personal choice in this.
Mm-hmm. And verse 11 tells us who they married. Sons of their father's brothers, keeping it exactly within the prescribed group, within the clans of Manasseh.
And the result is clear in verse 12. Their inheritance remained in the tribe of their father's clan. Problem solved. The potential crisis was averted not by some big miracle or a pronouncement from a mountain,
No.
but by the simple, quiet obedience of these 5 women.
It wasn't a flashy moment at all. Probably no one wrote a song about it, right? He was just navigating a complex legal and family situation with simple trust. The source calls it a quiet, faithful act of obedience.
Not dramatic, no, but deeply faithful.
Okay, so that's the story. A problem found, a divine solution given, and a quiet act of trust that resolved it, securing the future of a tribal inheritance. But why does the source point to this story out of everything else in Numbers as the concluding emphasis? What are the deeper messages hidden here?
That's the critical question, isn't it? The source suggests that this seemingly small, almost, bureaucratic moment, precisely because it contrasts so sharply with the rest of the book, highlights truths we often miss. One key message is this: obedience in the small things matters profoundly.
Like really matters. We often think obedience is about the big, dramatic Abraham and Isaac kind of moments.
Right.
But these women weren't called to do anything dramatic like that. They were just asked to follow a specific, perhaps inconvenient instruction about their personal relationships and property.
And the source really pushes back on our cultural focus on, big wins or actions that get a lot of attention, maybe go viral. It argues that God deeply values and honors that quiet faithfulness, the everyday choices to trust and follow him that maybe no one else ever sees. It's the mundane stuff where faith is really lived out.
That's a powerful reframe, actually.
Yeah.
It makes the seemingly unimportant choices suddenly feel, significant. What else does the source draw out?
Well, another key insight is that your choices today, even the quiet ones, shape the future. Their decision to obey wasn't just about their own lives or marriages. It had a direct, tangible impact on the land inheritance and the stability of their entire tribe for generations to come.
So it wasn't just a personal choice. It had this ripple effect on their whole community's future.
Exactly. And the source connects this directly to you, the listener. Your decisions, the ones you make quietly when maybe no one's looking, whether it's in your career, your relationships, how you manage your resources, or in your personal faith, they aren't isolated events. They are shaping your own path and potentially influencing the future of people around you in ways you might not realize right now.
Wow. That definitely elevates the importance of those seemingly insignificant moments. Is there a third takeaway the source mentions?
Yes. The source emphasizes that God sees and honors your faith even when others don't. The fact that these daughters are named multiple times in Scripture, back in Numbers 27, here in Numbers 36, and then later in Joshua when the land is actually distributed.
Right, they keep popping up.
That isn't an accident.
So why name them repeatedly for what seems like just simple compliance with a rule?
Well, what's fascinating here is the source suggests this repeated naming signals that God specifically sees and remembers this kind of quiet, faithful obedience. While the world might celebrate the loud or the dramatic, God's perspective includes and honors the unseen acts of trust. Their faithfulness wasn't forgotten in the divine record,
That's incredibly encouraging, actually, knowing that the quiet, consistent stuff registers somewhere important. So, okay, looking at this through the lens of our source material, how do we take this story tucked away at the end of this tumultuous book and apply it to our everyday lives?
Well, the source prompts us with some reflection questions. First, it asks you to consider, are you being faithful in the small things God has asked of you today? Not just the big, obvious stuff, but the mundane, everyday instructions or principles he's laid out.
Like, are we focusing so much on potential future big calls that we're neglecting the present, smaller ones right in front of us?
Exactly. Second, do you trust God enough to obey, even when it's not convenient or maybe not popular? For Zelophehad's daughters, it meant, potentially, limitations in their marriage options. Obedience often requires sacrificing personal preference or convenience.
Yeah, it's rarely the easiest path, is it?
No. And finally, the source asks, how might your quiet obedience today be impacting others around you, even in ways you don't see? Your integrity at work, maybe your patience in a difficult relationship, your consistent, even if unseen spiritual discipline, like prayer or reading scripture. Those aren't isolated acts.
Right. The source gives some concrete areas for this quiet faithfulness, too, like integrity in your career, even when no boss or colleague is watching.
Or honoring God in relationships, how you approach dating, how you show love and commitment in your marriage, even when it's hard and nobody else sees the effort.
Yeah. And simply being consistent in faith practices, prayer, reading scripture, participating in your faith community, even when it feels dry, you just don't feel like it. Those quiet, consistent disciplines are acts of obedience, too.
These are the ordinary ways that, well, extraordinary faithfulness is lived out day by day.
So you have the entire book of Numbers, just full of epic highs and dramatic lows, faith and failure, rebellion and miracles. And it ends not with a battle cry or a grand vision, but with a legal resolution and the simple statement, they did as the Lord commanded.
It's a pretty profound conclusion when you think about it. It reminds us that while the grand narratives are important, the kingdom is also built and God's purposes are fulfilled through the seemingly small, consistent choices of ordinary people just trusting and obeying him in the details of life.
What a perspective shift. Okay, so as you move through your week, maybe consider this. How might those small, consistent acts of obedience in your own life, the ones the world might never even notice, be holding profound significance in a perspective that truly sees and remembers everything? Something to think about.